The hospital monitor beeped softly beside my bed, a steady rhythm that should have been comforting but wasn't. My arms trembled as I held my newborn daughter for the first time, her tiny fingers curling around mine with surprising strength. My heart swelled with a love I'd never known existed, so powerful it almost hurt. Then my phone buzzed on the bedside table, loud and intrusive in the quiet room. I glanced at the screen with one hand, still cradling her carefully with the other. A banking notification glowed bright against the dim hospital lighting. Joint account balance, $0. My chest tightened instantly. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. I stared at those numbers, my vision blurring at the edges, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Zero. Complete zero. Not a decimal point out of place, not a dollar remaining. Every dollar we'd saved together over years, every penny I'd carefully put aside for this exact moment, gone. Vanished. The nurse noticed my expression and stepped closer with concern. "Mrs. Cole, are you all right? Should I call your husband?" My throat closed completely. I whispered through numb lips, barely audible. "He already took everything." She frowned, confused. I couldn't explain. Not yet. Not while my world was collapsing around me while I held our daughter. Kyle was missing. And so was our entire life savings. The nurse's words echoed in my mind from earlier, innocent and unsuspecting. "Your husband said he'd be right back. Just went to handle some paperwork downstairs." That was 2 hours ago now. 2 full hours while I labored through the final stages alone, while I pushed our daughter into the world without him holding my hand. I dialed his number with shaking fingers, my baby fussing softly against my chest. Straight to voicemail. His smooth, recorded voice felt like mockery now, calm and casual. "Hey, this is Kyle. Leave a message." I hung up without speaking. Called again immediately. Voicemail again. Another attempt. Same result. The flowers he'd brought when I first arrived at the hospital sat on the windowsill, already wilting in the dry hospital air. Yellow roses. My favorites. Or so he'd always claimed to remember, always made a show of knowing. Now they looked like props in a performance, meaningless gestures. I fumbled for my wallet with my free hand and pulled out our joint credit card, the one we'd designated for emergencies. My daughter fussed louder against my chest as I called the number on the back with trembling hands. "Declined," the automated voice informed me coldly. "Insufficient funds available." My baby started crying then, her small face scrunching up in distress. I wanted to cry too desperately, but nothing came. My tear ducts felt as empty as our bank account. I steadied my breathing with effort. In through my nose slowly. Out through my mouth carefully. The way they taught me in those labor classes Kyle had barely attended, always finding excuses or taking work calls in the hallway. My voice came out stronger than I expected when I finally spoke aloud. "My name is Aaron Cole. And the man who promised to protect me just robbed me while I was giving birth to his child." Saying it out loud made it real. Terrifyingly, undeniably real. My mind drifted back to the beginning, to college when everything felt possible and hopeful. Kyle had approached me at a campus coffee shop, all confidence and easy charm. "You look like someone who knows what she wants," he'd said smoothly, gesturing to my business textbooks spread across the table. We became inseparable quickly. Study partners first, then friends, then something more. After graduation we talked endlessly about building something together. A life. A business. The future. "We're a team," he'd always said with conviction. I believed him completely. God, how I believed him without question. I'd worked 2 jobs after college while he built his marketing consultancy from the ground up. Morning shifts at a bank, evening shifts waitressing at a busy restaurant. I barely slept, constantly exhausted, but I didn't mind the sacrifice. We were building our dream together. Or so I thought at the time. 3 years into our marriage, Kyle's business finally took off dramatically. He landed a major client, and suddenly money wasn't tight anymore, wasn't something we worried about constantly. He came home that night with champagne and an announcement, his face glowing with success. "You'll never have to worry about money again," he'd promised, pulling me into his arms tightly. "I've got us covered now. It's my turn to provide for our family." The words had sounded so sweet then, so romantic and caring. Like everything I'd worked for had finally paid off, like we'd made it. But looking back now, I could see how that promise slowly twisted into something else over time. Something darker and more controlling. "Let me handle the accounts," he'd suggest casually, like it was no big deal. You've been managing money for so long, working so hard. Just relax now. Focus on making our house a home. At first I'd resisted the suggestion. I liked knowing where our money went, liked having control and understanding. But Kyle had ways of making me feel small about it, guilty for not trusting. Don't you trust me? He'd ask, hurt coloring his voice perfectly. I'd back down every time, uncomfortable with conflict. Trust was supposed to be the foundation of marriage, wasn't it? So I signed the papers he put in front of me. Let him take control of everything financial. Let him be the provider he wanted to be so badly. I hadn't realized I was handing over my freedom too. The shift happened gradually, so subtle I almost didn't notice at first. Kyle started checking my receipts carefully, examining every purchase. Just keeping track of our budget, he'd explain with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But his eyes would scan every line item closely, and he'd question anything over $20 with concern. Did you really need new shoes? He'd ask. Not angrily exactly. Just concerned. Reasonable. That made it harder to argue against, harder to defend. I started buying less, asking permission more often. It felt easier than facing the interrogation afterward. Then came the day I asked about our savings account directly. We'd been talking about buying a house, looking at neighborhoods, and I wanted to see where we stood financially before making plans. Kyle's face had darkened immediately, his expression shifting. Why don't you trust me? He'd said, voice rising. I do trust you. I just want to see. You just want to see what? Proof that I'm not screwing up? That I can't handle our money properly? His voice had risen further. Not quite yelling, but close enough that I'd stepped back instinctively, frightened by his intensity. That's not what I meant at all, I'd said quietly, backing down. But the damage was done. I stopped asking questions after that. Stopped checking anything. Just trusted blindly while he built walls around our finances that I didn't know existed, didn't understand until too late. When I found out I was pregnant, Kyle had smiled initially. Hugged me tightly. Said all the right things that expectant fathers say. We're going to be parents, he'd whispered against my hair softly. This is amazing news. But his support lasted exactly 3 weeks before cracks appeared. Then came the complaints, starting subtle and growing bitter. Subtle at first, then increasingly harsh. Do you know how much diapers cost? He'd mutter while scrolling through his phone, calculating expenses. Daycare is basically a second mortgage payment. We should have waited longer, planned better. Kids are financial suicide, Aaron. People don't talk about it honestly, but they are. Each comment landed like a small punch to my stomach. I'd wanted this baby desperately. We talked about starting a family for years. Or had that just been me talking hopefully while he nodded along without meaning it? His resentment seeped into everything gradually. The way he'd sigh heavily when I mentioned needing maternity clothes. How he'd go completely silent when I showed him nursery furniture options online, refusing to engage. I started keeping my excitement to myself, hiding my joy. Celebrating milestones alone in silence. Talking to my baby in whispers when Kyle wasn't home, sharing dreams and hopes. It's just stress, I told myself repeatedly. He'll come around once you're born, once he sees you. I was so wrong about that. At 7 months pregnant, Kyle sat me down for what he called a serious conversation, one evening. I think you should quit your part-time job, he said carefully. His tone was gentle, reasonable, concerned for my well-being. I'd gone back to working 15 hours a week at the bank just to feel useful and productive. To have something that was mine separate from him. Why? I'd asked, genuinely confused by the suggestion. The stress isn't good for the baby, he explained patiently. You need to rest. Focus on staying healthy and calm. It made sense on the surface. It sounded caring and protective. But something in my gut twisted uncomfortably with warning. We can manage fine on my income, he continued smoothly. I want you comfortable. Safe. Not worrying about work. So I quit. And the cage door locked firmly behind me. Without my own income, I had no access to money except what Kyle gave me. Grocery money. Gas money. Always just enough, never extra for anything personal. Everything's handled, he'd say whenever I asked about bills or savings or anything financial. Don't stress yourself. It's not good for the baby's development. But I felt the walls closing in slowly. No job. No money. No independence. Just complete reliance on a man who increasingly felt like a stranger living in my house. One night, 3 weeks before my due date, Kyle fell asleep on the couch with his laptop still open beside him. I walked past quietly on my way to get water and something on the screen caught my eye immediately. An email notification glowed in the darkness of the living room. Subject line: Account transfer authorization. My heart started pounding hard. I shouldn't look. It was an invasion of privacy, a violation of trust. But my hands moved before my brain could stop them, driven by instinct. I clicked. Read quickly. My blood turned cold. Account transfers. Multiple ones. Moving money systematically from our joint accounts into accounts with only his name attached. Dates going back months. Amounts that made my head spin with shock. My hands shook violently as I grabbed my phone and photographed every document I could find quickly. Email after email. Transaction records. Account statements I'd never seen before, never knew existed. Kyle stirred on the couch suddenly. I quickly closed everything, deleted the browser history carefully, and slipped back toward the bedroom silently. My mind raced. What was he planning? Why was he hiding money from me systematically? The baby kicked hard inside me and I placed my hand protectively on my belly. We're going to be okay, I whispered softly. But I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. The next morning I called my cousin Laura immediately. She was the only family I had left in the area, and she worked as a paralegal downtown. Can we meet? I asked, trying desperately to keep my voice steady. It's important. We met at a coffee shop far from our neighborhood, somewhere Kyle would never go. I showed her everything on my phone. Every photo. Every document I'd captured. Laura's expression grew darker with each swipe. Finally, she looked up at me seriously. Aaron, he's isolating you financially, she said quietly but firmly. This is textbook financial abuse. The word hit me like cold water. Abuse. I'd never thought of it that way before. You need to start documenting everything, Laura continued urgently. Every transaction. Every conversation. Every time he controls or questions your spending. Build a paper trail. I nodded, my hands wrapped around my untouched coffee. What if I'm overreacting? You're not. Laura reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Trust your gut. And trust me. Men like this, they don't stop. They escalate. I started keeping records that day. Screenshots. Notes. Dates and times. A secret folder on my phone labeled recipes. I was preparing for war, even though I didn't want to believe it would come to that. 2 weeks before my due date, I overheard Kyle on the phone in his office. I'd come upstairs to ask him about dinner, but stopped outside the door when I heard his voice. Oh, pleased with himself. Once it's under my name, it's completely untouchable, he said confidently. She has no legal claim to accounts she's not on. Silence. He was listening to whoever was on the other end. Trust me, I've thought this through. By the time she figures it out, everything will be protected. My hand was on the doorknob. I pulled it back and stepped away quietly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I went back downstairs. Stirred pasta sauce with mechanical movements. My mind raced through everything I discovered. Every piece suddenly fit together into a horrible picture. Kyle came down 20 minutes later, all smiles. Hey babe. You look stressed. I managed to smile back. Just tired. Why don't you go rest? I'll finish dinner. He kissed my forehead. Rubbed my swollen belly. Played the devoted husband perfectly. I went upstairs and added another entry to my documentation file. I was beginning to understand. He was planning something. And my due date was the deadline. When contractions started, I was folding laundry in the nursery. The first one made me grip the changing table, breathing through the pain. Kyle. I called out. He appeared in the doorway immediately. Is it time? I nodded. I think so. The drive to the hospital should have been special. Exciting. Instead, it felt heavy with unspoken tension. Halfway there, Kyle's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and answered. This is important. I have to take this. Kyle, I'm in labor. I know, babe. 2 minutes. He launched into a business conversation like I wasn't gasping through contractions beside him. At the hospital, he helped me check in. Got me settled in the room. Then his phone rang again. I need to take this. I'll grab coffee and be right back. That was the last time I saw him for hours. While I labored. While nurses held my hand through pushing. while I brought our daughter into the world. The nurse brought me papers to sign. Standard financial forms. Insurance information. That's when I asked to borrow her phone charger. My hands shook as I logged into our bank account. I already knew what I'd find, but seeing it still knocked the breath from my lungs. Savings account, $0. Checking account, $0. Joint emergency fund, $0. Every account we'd built together, completely emptied. The timestamps showed the transfers had happened that morning. I was in labor. While I was giving birth to his child. He'd actually done it. Stolen everything while I was at my most vulnerable. The nurse saw my face. "Honey, what's wrong?" I couldn't speak. Just showed her the screen. Her expression shifted from concern to anger. "Let me get the charge, nurse. We have resources for situations like this." I nodded numb. My daughter slept peacefully in my arms, completely unaware that her father had just betrayed us both. Laura burst into my hospital room 6 hours after I called her. Her blazer was crooked like she'd thrown it on in a hurry. "Show me everything," she said. I handed her my phone. She scrolled through bank statements, her jaw clenching tighter with each screen. "We can freeze the accounts if we act fast," Laura said. "File an emergency motion. I've already called Attorney Finch. She specializes in financial abuse cases." "How fast?" My voice cracked. "Tonight. We need you to sign some documents." She spread papers across my hospital tray table. I signed between feeding my daughter. Between tears. Between waves of exhaustion and fury. The nurse who'd stayed late squeezed my shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, sweetie. I've seen women in your position before. The ones who fight back. They always surprise everyone. Even themselves." I looked at my baby girl. At her perfect tiny face. I'd walked into this hospital as Kyle's wife, his dependent, his victim. I'd walk out as something else entirely. Kyle strolled into my hospital room the next afternoon. He held balloons. Wore a big smile. Carried coffee like nothing had happened. "How's my girl?" he asked cheerfully. I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man I'd loved. The stranger I'd married. "Which one?" I said coldly. "Me or the bank account?" His smile faltered. Just for a second. Then he recovered, laughing uncertainly. "What? Aaron, what are you talking about?" "Our savings, Kyle. The checking account. The emergency fund. All of it. Gone." Kept my voice level. "Come. Where is it?" He set down the balloons carefully. "Babe, you're exhausted. You just gave birth. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking very clearly. Clearer than I have in months. It's just a temporary transfer. For business purposes. You know how these things work." I smiled. Actually smiled. "Then why'd you put everything into accounts with only your name on them?" His face went blank. "You don't understand finances, Aaron. I understand theft." The word hung in the air between us like smoke. His jaw clenched. His eyes went hard. There was the real Kyle. The one he'd been hiding behind charm and smiles. Kyle tried to laugh it off. "You're being dramatic. It's our money. I'm just managing it properly." Without telling me. While I was giving birth. The timing was coincidental. The timing was calculated. I adjusted our daughter in my arms. She'd started fussing, picking up on the tension in the room. "You waited until I was at my most vulnerable. Until I couldn't stop you or question you. This is insane. You sound paranoid." "I sound informed." I met his eyes. "I found the emails, Kyle. The transfer authorizations. The account statements. I've known for weeks what you were planning." Color drained from his face. "You went through my private correspondence? You stole our life savings. I think snooping is the least of our concerns." He moved toward me, then stopped when I flinched. "Aaron, listen to me carefully. That money is safe. It's protected. For our family." "Protected from who?" "Me. Protected from bad decisions. You're emotional right now. Hormonal." "I'm thinking clearly. I'd heard enough. Get out." Laura connected me with Attorney Finch that evening. She appeared via video call on a tablet the hospital provided. Finch was maybe 50, with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like someone who didn't lose cases. "Mrs. Cole, I've reviewed the documents your cousin sent. What your husband has done leaves an extensive paper trail." Her voice was calm but firm. The key word here is patience. Patience. My voice cracked. He stole everything. I understand your anger. But rushing gets messy. We need to be strategic. Methodical. She outlined a plan. Emergency injunction. Forensic audit. Documentation of every conversation. Building an airtight case. How long? I asked. Days, not weeks. The courts move quickly when children are involved. I nodded, exhaustion pulling at my edges. I don't want revenge. I just want what's fair. Finch smiled slightly. Fair is what we'll get. But Mrs. Cole? When men like your husband lose control, they often lose their composure too. Be prepared for him to escalate. I am, I said. But I wasn't sure I meant it. My daughter yawned against my chest. Patience I have, I added quietly. Forgiveness. That's gone. Finch moved fast. Within 48 hours she'd filed an emergency injunction. The court froze all accounts pending investigation. Not just the ones Kyle had drained, but everything. His business accounts. His personal savings. Even the new accounts he'd opened in his name only. Laura called me at my mother's house where I'd gone after leaving the hospital. It's done. Everything's frozen. He knows. His lawyer probably called him an hour ago. I imagined Kyle getting that call. His shock. His anger. His absolute certainty that I'd never have the courage or resources to fight back. He'd underestimated me so completely. The forensic audit started that same day. A court-appointed accountant began tracing every dollar Kyle had moved. Every transfer. Every hidden account. Every lie. This is going to take a few weeks, Finch warned me. But Kyle doesn't know that. He thinks you're bluffing. That you'll back down. I won't. I know. But he doesn't. That's our advantage. I hung up and looked at my baby sleeping in her bassinet. She had no idea her father was about to lose everything because he'd gotten too greedy. Too arrogant. Too certain I'd stay quiet forever. Kyle showed up at my mother's house 3 days after the freeze. I heard him pounding on the door from the nursery upstairs. Aaron, open this door. My mother answered. I heard her calm voice through the floor. Kyle, you need to leave. I need to talk to my wife. Your wife has nothing to say to you. This is insane. He froze our accounts. Do you know what she's done? My mother's voice went cold. I'd only heard that tone a handful of times in my life. I know exactly what she's done. She's protecting herself and her daughter from a man who robbed her during labor. That's not what happened. Then what did happen, Kyle? Explain why you drained every account while she was in the hospital. Silence. He had no good answer because there wasn't one. Get off my property, my mother said. And don't come back unless you have a court order. The door slammed. I heard his car peel out of the driveway moments later. My mother came upstairs, her face composed but her hands shaking slightly. He's scared, she said. And scared men do stupid things. I know. I was scared too. But I couldn't show it. Kyle's lawyer sent a letter demanding custody mediation. The threat was barely veiled. My client deserves equal access to his daughter. He has concerns about the mother's stability and decision-making. I read it twice, my stomach churning. He was actually going to try to take her from me. Laura looked at it and laughed bitterly. He's desperate. This won't work. How do you know? Because you have evidence. He has threats. I'd been documenting everything for weeks now. Every controlling conversation. Every financial manipulation. The timeline of the theft. His abandonment during labor. All of it organized in a folder Finch now had copies of. When Kyle's lawyer called for a meeting, Finch went in my place. She came back with a recording of the conversation. He wants to settle, Finch said. Settle. Split everything 50-50. Drop all claims. Move on. I stared at her. Split what he stole from me? Exactly. I told him where he could put his offer. He played me the recording. Kyle's lawyer sputtering. Finch's calm response. The moment she mentioned the wire transfers time-stamped during my labor, and the lawyer had gone completely silent. They know they have nothing, Finch said. Now we wait for them to panic. Kyle's business started collapsing within 2 weeks. With his accounts frozen, he couldn't pay his employees. Couldn't pay rent on his office space. Couldn't pay vendors. Laura showed me social media posts from former employees. This company is a scam. Kyle Cole owes me 3 weeks of wages. Avoid this fraud at all costs. His carefully curated image was rotting in real time. His friends stopped returning calls. The associates who'd praised him at networking events suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The illusion of success he'd built required constant funding, and that funding was locked away. I felt something between satisfaction and sadness watching it happen. This was the life he'd chosen. The empire built on lies and theft and control. My daughter grabbed my finger as I scrolled through the posts. She looked at me with those huge, trusting eyes. Your dad made choices, I told her softly. And choices have consequences. She yawned, completely unconcerned with the adult drama surrounding her birth. I wished I could be that peaceful. Kyle showed up at mediation with a new strategy. Pretend to be reasonable. Look, I messed up, he said, hands spread wide. I panicked. Made bad decisions. But let's just split everything 50-50 and move forward. For the baby. For the baby. Like he cared. Finch didn't even let me respond. Your client drained marital accounts during a vulnerable moment. He abandoned his wife during childbirth. He has exhibited a pattern of financial abuse spanning years. That's a mischaracterization, it's documented fact. Finch slid a folder across the table. Every transaction. Every email. Every controlling conversation. All time-stamped. All verifiable. Kyle's lawyer flipped through it, his face growing paler with each page. So here's our counteroffer, Finch continued. Mr. Cole returns every stolen dollar. Mrs. Cole receives sole custody with supervised visitation. And Mr. Cole pays child support based on his actual income, not the fabricated numbers he'll try to claim. Kyle slammed his hand on the table. This is extortion. This is consequences. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. Kyle, we should discuss this privately. They left the room. Finch looked at me. You okay? I nodded, though my hands were shaking. When will this be over? Soon. They have no leverage. Only pride. Pride. That was all Kyle had left now. The judge's ruling came 3 weeks later. I sat in the courtroom holding my daughter Laura on my left, Finch on my right. In the matter of Cole versus Cole, the judge began. She was an older woman with kind eyes and steel in her voice. She reviewed the evidence. The theft. The abandonment. The pattern of control. This court finds that Mr. Cole engaged in deliberate financial abuse. All marital assets will be returned to Mrs. Cole's control immediately. Sole custody is granted to Mrs. Cole. Mr. Cole will have supervised visitation and will pay child support calculated at his full business income. Kyle's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping. His lawyer put papers in front of him to sign. He just stared at them. Mr. Cole, the judge said. Sign the papers. He grabbed the pen. Scrawled his signature with angry, violent strokes. When he looked at me, I didn't look away. I met his gaze steadily. He'd expected me to crumble. To beg. To forgive. He said I'd fought back. And won. The gavel came down. This case is closed. I walked out of that courtroom with my daughter and my freedom. Kyle walked out with nothing but his own bitterness. Days later, Kyle tried to buy lunch with his business debit card. The card reader beeped twice. Declined. He tried again, certain it was a machine error. The cashier looked uncomfortable. Declined. There must be a mistake, Kyle said, pulling out another card. Same result. He called the bank from the parking lot, his food forgotten on the counter inside. The automated system informed him his accounts were under court order. Funds seized pending restitution payment. He finally whispered to himself in that empty parking lot. She actually did this. No one was around to hear him. His employees were gone. His friends had vanished. His wife had taken back everything he'd stolen. He sat in his car for an hour, staring at nothing. Finally, he started the engine and drove to his tiny studio apartment. The one he could barely afford now. The one that smelled like old carpet and regret. His phone buzzed. Another bill he couldn't pay. He'd built his life on control. And the moment he'd lost it, everything had crumbled like sand. Meanwhile, I opened my own bank account. Just mine. My name only. I deposited my first consulting paycheck. I'd started freelancing from home, using skills I'd almost forgotten I had. The bank teller smiled as she processed the transaction. Starting fresh, she asked kindly. Something like that. That same afternoon I drove past Kyle's office building. Or what used to be his office building. The space was empty now. Stripped. A for-lease sign hung in the window. Outside, a tow truck was loading Kyle's leased BMW. The driver worked efficiently, ignoring Kyle's protests from the sidewalk. I slowed down. Not to gloat. Just to see. To understand that this was real. My daughter cooed from her car seat in the back. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her whole life stretched ahead of her. And I'd make sure it was built on truth, not lies. On respect, not control. I drove away as the tow truck pulled out behind me, going the opposite direction. Kyle grew smaller in my mirror until he disappeared completely. It felt poetic somehow. Him disappearing. Finally invisible the way he'd made me feel for so long. 1 year later, I sat in my apartment recording a podcast episode. It was a small project I'd started called Financial Freedom After Abuse. My daughter played on a mat nearby, babbling happily to her toys. She was walking now. Talking. Growing. He drained our account while I was in labor, I said into the microphone. My voice was steady. Strong. Every dollar we'd saved together. Gone. He left me in that hospital with nothing but a newborn and empty accounts. I paused, watching my daughter try to stack blocks. But when he tried to take more, when he tried to keep control, his card got declined. And so did my willingness to ever depend on someone who didn't respect me. My daughter laughed at something. The sound was pure joy. Uncomplicated. I smiled. This isn't a revenge story. It's a story about boundaries. About understanding that leaving is stronger than staying when staying means losing yourself. I wrapped up the episode and saved the file. My consulting business was thriving. My daughter was healthy. We lived in a small apartment that was ours alone. No one controlled where the money went but me. Kyle had visitation twice a month, supervised. He paid his support on time now. The court had made sure of that. We didn't speak beyond logistics. The story didn't end with him broken and me triumphant. It ended with both of us separate. Building different lives. Learning different lessons. I'd learned I was stronger than I thought. That quiet didn't mean weak. That documentation mattered. That asking for help wasn't failure. Kyle had learned nothing is truly untouchable. That control is an illusion. That theft has consequences, even when you're stealing from someone who loves you. Especially then. My daughter toddled over and grabbed my leg, wanting to be picked up. I lifted her onto my lap. She smelled like baby shampoo and possibilities. We're okay, I whispered into her soft hair. We're more than okay. And for the first time in years I meant it completely.